Who is that good-looking devil?
I found it up there on the Rule of Law Radio website. So,
That's somebody I used to know a long time ago.
welcome
Good
to the
looking.
show.
Glad to be here.
Thanks. And
But who's that old guy you got with you? I like the picture better.
yeah, I'm working on my age as well. I'm going back in time, and I'm on this
Well,
vitamin A diet, and I've been restricting vitamin A, and I really think my face is getting younger.
well, I've been using stem cells,
Whoa.
and it has made a tremendous difference. You should have seen me 6 months ago. I look like that picture. Okay, you indicated in your email that you had an issue with adhesive contracts.
Oh yeah.
And there's a lot of talk in the patriot community about being able to opt out of contracts. You can only opt out of a contract if you haven't benefited from the contract. If you come into the state of Texas and you pass the geographical boundaries of the state, you enter into an adhesion contract whereby you agree to abide by the criminal laws of the state. If you take advantage of state highways that were built with state money, then
On
you
they were built on pathways that were intended to for people to travel as a common
yes,
as as a common route. You
yeah, and
can't take a right and turn it into a privilege.
we're not, we're not. That's not what this does. It says you can't drive on our highways and kill other people. You can't drive like a crazy person. What this originally started with was Truman. Before he became president, he was a road builder, and he was aghast at 50,000 people a year being killed on the highways back in 47. And
Truman.
he had the Corps of Engineers develop the superhighway system, and he had them put together a model transportation code. Now, this code was meant for commercial drivers because this was in the overall history of the United States. This was incredibly new. I know people think it wasn't so terribly new because cars had been around for 40 something years by then. But at 70, that was new. Uh, when I was 40, we didn't have near the technology we have now. So I've watched things change dramatically, and a lot of it changed because of Truman. He built these highways. He said, "You guys are building highways for horse and buggies. These 90-degree intersections are going to kill everybody." So he designed the highway system. And at the time, the trucks were getting bigger very fast. Their brakes were horrible. The people driving them had no idea what they were doing, and they were destroying the infrastructure. So he put in a licensing agreement where everyone operating commercial vehicles, they don't have a right to travel. Now you have a right to travel, but if you're using our highways for commercial gain, that's not a right you have. That's a privilege. That's a privilege the state grants based on your agreeing to certain covenants. Well, what happened was they couldn't have passed this if it involved ordinary people. because we were just beginning to get automobiles and we were in love with our automobiles. And we just got out of a war against a tyrant and we weren't going to let anybody tell us what we could do with our automobiles. So he couldn't pass it for the general public. He could only pass it for commercial vehicles. And he did that. Then over time, the police began enforcing it against private citizens. Not their fault, our fault. We sat back, and the first time one of our public officials stepped across one of our legal lines, we didn't jump up and down and rail in righteous indignation. We said, well, it's easier just to pay this ticket than to fight it.
That that's what I like about you, Randy, is you teach people how to channel, I think, their righteous indignation and stuff through the process and hold the politicians to the rules of their
Yeah.
laws.
Well, you have to understand, I am not religious. I'm not a Christian. I'm certainly not anti-religion. God, if there is a God, if he's out there, he hasn't chosen to touch my heart. It's not that I'm not open. He just hasn't chosen it. If he's there and he has a purpose, he has a different purpose for me. And I say these things not out of any religious context, but this is just what works. I'm older and I've had time. I've been around a while, and this whole notion of good and evil, it may be such a thing, but it's a bad strategy. The patriot community has used it to cast our public officials in a extremely bad light. Oh, they're just evil. Well, what can you do if they're evil? Well, what am I against evil? Well, that's all nonsense. We are citizens of a republic. The buck stops here. If we don't like the way our government is operating, we need to stand up and do something about it and not complain because public officials are doing what they can get away with. That is in the human nature. That's why we have laws and rules. We will stretch every law and rule to its limit. So you and I, as citizens in the republic, it's our job to stand up and make sure our public officials follow our law. Now, is that easy? No, it's not exactly easy. But I got off subject slightly. I wanted to address the adhesion contract.
Yeah.
You see, we built these roads. We maintain them. So if you want to use them, we have certain restrictions that we've put on the use of them just so you don't wind up killing us and our neighbors and our children. They're just safety codes. I don't have any problem with the transportation code. The only problem I have is my public officials took my law that was designed for commercial drivers and decided on their own to apply it to me. That I have a problem with. The legislature certainly could have passed the transportation code into substantive law and made it applicable to everybody. But they didn't do that. And we should pay close attention to the fact that they did not do that. They could do that tomorrow. Our legislatures in session now, they could pass a amendment that made the transportation code apply to all persons who operate a motorized conveyance on any highway. They could do that. But they didn't do that. So the issue is not whether or not we are want to just drive like crazy people out there on the highway and we're some kinds of wild reactionaries. It's
Right.
about following law. It's about public officials not exerting or purporting to exert an authority they do not expressly have, and in the process denying citizens in the full and free access to or enjoyment of a right. You might have noticed that was a very specific type of statement. And where did I get that? I got that from 39.03 Texas Penal Code that makes it a Class A misdemeanor to exert or purport to exert an authority you do not expressly have, and in the process deny a citizen full and free access to or enjoyment of rights. That's a crime in every state. It's a reflection of the Ku Klux Klan Act, originally passed in 1871, to stop these groups in the South from these vigilante groups. Well, it wasn't used until 1945. We have a lot of laws like that. In 1945, there was a case called Screws v. U.S. Two black guys in a bar, I'm sorry, two sheriff's deputies and the sheriff in a bar drinking. They're upset at this black guy. They decide to go arrest him. Bartender tries to talk him out of it. They won't be dissuaded. They arrest him, wind up beating him to death on the courthouse steps.
Uh-oh.
They're prosecuted in the state. They're sued in the were sued in the Fed. And the court said they were sued under the Ku Klux Klan Act. That was the first time it was ever used. And the court said, that's why I like screws, because more than once I've accused a public official of being screwed. Screws v. U.S. says that if a public official, said a private citizen cannot claim ignorance of the law as a defense to prosecution. A public official is held to a much higher standard. If a public official violates a ruling of this court and he be sane, he may not be heard to say he knows not what he does. So, under law, under case law, the rule of law absolutely applies, and it applies to everyone. I have just sued the highest judges in the state of Texas because they violated a little bitty law, a little bitty one. In the last legislative session, the legislature added a section to the Texas Code of Criminal Procedure. They directed the Office of Court Administration to act in consultation with the Court of Criminal Appeals. If you're not in Texas, let me explain Court of Criminal Appeals. We have two high courts. One high court for civil, Supreme, another high court for criminal, Court of Criminal Appeals. They are the highest court in Texas for criminal. Well, he directed them to act in consultation with the Office of Court Administration and develop curriculum for the training of magistrates in the setting of bail and other duties. But they didn't do that. What they did was developed training that trained magistrates to commit criminal acts, to ignore long-standing law. Now, what do you call that when two or three people get together and decide on a course of action that's criminal?
Oh,
That's
a
not,
conspiracy?
that's what I called it. A conspiracy to commit a set of ongoing criminal activities.
Wow.
Predicate acts toward an ongoing criminal conspiracy. Anybody who's heard of RICO knows what that means. So I sued them
Racketeering and corrupt influence operation
on organization.
organization.
I claim that in Texas, it's Chapter 71 and it's called the Street Gang Statute. I call them a street gang. They trained magistrates to commit crimes from the bench. They train police officers to arrest people and take them straight to jail. The code says if you arrest someone for an on site offense with no warrant, 14.06, you are to take them directly to the nearest magistrate. If you arrest someone on an existing warrant, 1516, you are to take them directly to the nearest magistrate. If you arrest them for a traffic violation, 543.002, you are to take them directly to the nearest magistrate. How hard is that to understand? It seems really clear in law. Nobody does it. And why don't they do it? There was a conundrum. I once spent the night in jail for driving with the headlight out back in 81. Well, I was driving a truck, and the code said you have to have at least two lamps lighted to the front, one of which must be white. Well, I had 13 lamps lighted to the front, one of which was white. But I spent the night in jail because the police officer happened to be in a bad mood that day, and he took it out on me. So I got out and I read the penal code and the code of criminal procedure, and I thought, have I stepped through the looking glass? How could the practice be so dramatically different than the code? All these people out here and pushing these patriot solutions, they should read the code. They'll get a come to Jesus moment.
How much of a read is that?
It's not long. 90, well, I'm sorry, about 50% of it's white space because it's all outlined. And I tell people you should be able to read the Texas Penal Code, and most all codes are developed from a model penal code put out by Truman. You should be able to read it in a couple hours. What I suggest people do is get the code. Don't try to understand it. Just read it. Just read through it. The reason being, when laws are passed, they're passed when the issue comes up. They're not all passed in order. The law is passed and is put into the National Register or the Public Register in Texas. I had Ralph Winterrood come on my show and say that this codes didn't apply. What applies, Ralph? Oh, yeah, you have to go to the National Register. Well, that's really nice, Ralph. The National Register is about 65,000 pages. You want to be a little more specific? Well, the government saw that problem, and the criminal codes are scattered all through there. So they hired a publishing company to go through and pull all the codes out and organize them by subject matter. And we call those codes and statutes. And Ralph was right that the code and the statute is not law. It is a representation of law. But to the degree that the statute or code accurately reflects the intent of the legislature in passing the code, it has the force of law. And I told him, don't come on my show and tell people this law doesn't apply. These cops out here, they got big guns and they got billy clubs and bad attitudes. They think it applies. When they thump you over the noggin, it's going to feel like it applies. And when you spend the night in jail, it's also going to feel like it applies. So let's treat it like it applies. Hey, that works for me. I went to a judge in Victoria County and I handed him 4 criminal complaints. He looked at them and he said, "Are you an attorney?" "Oh, no, no, no. I sleep well at night and keep my hands in my own pockets. Thank you very much." That's my standard retort. He said, "Well, have you talked to an attorney?" Nah. I don't waste my time with those ignorant shysters." "Well, if you're not an attorney, I'm not even going to read these." And he threw them down on the counter and he stormed out in a fit of righteous indignation. Well, I was not impressed. I watched him storm out of the office, and these clerks are sitting there, and they're kind of nervous now because the GE got excited. I said, "Well, Bubba, we'll see how that works out for you." I pulled out my cell phone, dialed 911, and asked for an officer to arrest the judge because I read the code. I didn't just read it, I read it through quickly, and then I went back and read through it again. The second time you read the code, you start stitching the pieces together. When you first read it, you read 211 that says when a magistrate sits for the purpose of examining into a criminal accusation, that is an examining court. First time you read that, it won't make any sense. Second time you read it, you'll say, oh, that's what chapter 16 is all about. And you'll start stitching these pieces together. I had my local county attorney tell me once that, Mr. Kelton, you need to be careful, or you can be charged with the illegal practice of law. I said, oh, no, no problem with that. 38.123 says it is a crime to hold oneself out as a lawyer and represent a client in a property damage and personal injury case. He said, are you sure? Oh, I'm sure. He got out the code and he read it. It said exactly what I told him. And I said, Greg, you ought to be ashamed of yourself. When was the last time you read that? Well, I've never read the whole thing. What? You ought to be ashamed of yourself. He said, well, Mr. Kelton, I don't know a single attorney who's read the whole thing. That's pitiful. But that is the truth. They don't know squat. You read that code twice, all these guys doing this patriot stuff, man, just read the code twice.
Well, I'll tell
I
you,
go
Randy,
read.
I'm not, I don't, I don't consider myself a citizen. I don't consider the Constitution. It's got a lot of nice things in it. I think it's a banking instrument from the Rothschilds when they were trying to uh, refinance the revolutionary debt. And there's things my friends showed me in the papers, the papers that talk about the Constitution.
Madison, James Madison's constitutional paper. What are they called?
Yeah, we're not going to
Yeah,
remember it just yet.
yeah, no,
We will. And and in there, it talked about that it wasn't unanimously passed, and there were records of people being brought to vote on it at gunpoint, and
okay.
so
So
this.
what?
Well, anyway, I don't. I mean, I'm with you. I
Yeah.
love what you're talking
Well,
about.
okay.
Federalist Papers. Thank you, Roger, in the chat room.
Yeah.
The wisdom of the crowd.
Okay. Okay. What I have to say to that is, so what? What's that
Um,
have to do with anything?
I just wanted you to know where I'm coming from,
Yeah, yeah.
and that
I've heard these arguments, but at the end of the day, human beings are not able to regulate themselves. It's unfortunate, but it is the nature of the human animal. We need regulation. We need some kind of consistency. I need to be able to know that when my children walk out the front door, that they walk out into some sort of order. And we have a sort of order, but it is transitory. If we don't stay right on top of it, it will morph out of all proportions. And that's what's happened in Texas. Everything is wrong in Texas. We have absolutely the best body of law of any state in the union. There is not One single remedy I need that's not in that code. Now, we've got all these guys with guns, and we've got all these judges that tell these guys with guns what to do. They pretend to follow what's in that code. Okay, that'll work for me. You want to pretend to follow that code? I'll take that code and cram it right up your behinds. This judge, I called the police department, asked to send somebody out to arrest him. Well, why would we arrest the judge? Class A misdemeanor, official misconduct, criminal violation, 15.09 Texas Code of Criminal Procedure, which says when a complaint is presented to a magistrate complete in accordance with 1505, and 1505 just sets the requisites, the magistrate shall issue a warrant forthwith. What part of that is hard to understand? It does not say he shall examine into the sufficiency of the complaint. It says he shall issue a warrant forthwith. Well, he did not issue a warrant forthwith. Now, judges have absolute immunity, except when they perform an administrative duty. And when you are directed to do a specific thing over which you have no discretion, that is an administrative duty. It is not a judicial determination. I played him like a cheap fiddle. I sued him personally. Oh, and when I got into court, they got a judge in there specifically just to deny everything. But before the court started, I handed him a stack of criminal complaints against the judge, against the sheriff, and just a whole bunch of them.
Are you
And
getting
he
quiet
reviewed.
for some reason? I still hear you, but you just seem a
No,
little quieter than before.
something must have went down because I'm attempting to be real consistent here in
Oh,
my
okay.
speech. So he refused to issue warrants. He somehow missed the irony. I was suing the previous judge in his court for not issuing warrants, and he refused to issue warrants. So I quoted him Walker v. Packer. Texas has the best. Walker Packer says a judge has no discretion in properly applying the law to the facts. A failure to do so is an abuse of discretion. Well, the way I read the penal code of the state of Texas, if you abuse your discretion and in the process deny me the full free access to or enjoyment of a right, well, that's a Class A misdemeanor under 39.03 penal code. Mr. Bailiff, did you hear that? The bailiff just stood there.
So are
Mr. Bailiff,
you saying that that number one, the judge had a duty to accept the criminal complaint. He violated that duty, so you called 911 to have them send someone out to arrest him, and then they didn't do it. So they are denying you a right,
yes. This
a
is
deprivation of rights.
I call this running the routine on them. See, I have these rules. Never ask a public official to do anything you actually want them to do. Because you never ask a public official to do anything that the law does not compel them to do. So when they don't do it, boom, you get to land on them like a ton of bricks. You just haven't lived until you've called 911 on a police officer. Just ask him to do something that he's required to do. And when he doesn't do it, or if a police officer gives you a hard time, if he lets his hand drift over close to his pistol, 911. I was in the Travis County courthouse. The guy wouldn't let me in without a mask. I said, well, go get the clerk and bring her down here. Because he did that in the county court across the way. And this little guy up at me and he said, was that an order? I thought a minute and I said, well, yeah, as a matter of fact, it was. He said, "How's that worked out for you so far?" I leaned over him and said, I'm 6 feet and he was about 5'6". So I leaned over him and said, "Pretty good. You want to test it?" He said, "Yes." "Okay, wait right there. Don't go anywhere. Somebody's going to want to talk to you, Bubba." I took out my cell phone and he said, "You can't use a phone in this building." I said, "Are you going to interfere with a 911 call?" And another bailiff come over and grabbed him and drug him away. And I called 911 and asked him to send somebody out to arrest him. And when the 911 guy got there, he wouldn't arrest the guy. He wouldn't take my complaint. So I reached in my case and pulled out my criminal complaint I already had made up against the 911. I put his on it. I said, "You need to get your supervisor out here so he can arrest you." The guy looked at me and he said, I get the he said, "I get the impression this is not your first rodeo." "No, Bubba, this is not my first rodeo. This is how we get our public officials back in line. I have sued all the highest judges in Texas personally, in their personal capacity. I didn't sue the state of Texas because the state of Texas can't do anything. The state of Texas is a legal fiction. It doesn't really exist. It's just a name we put up there. People do things. The state of Texas did not engage in an ongoing criminal enterprise. These judges engaged in an ongoing criminal enterprise, and their immunity does not extend to criminal behavior. So let's dance, guys. I want your bass boat. You want to play fast and loose with the code? You want to change the procedures to make life easier for you guys? Well, we'll see how that works out for you. We can all do this. And I tell you guys, this is so much fun. In that case where the judge wouldn't issue warrants, I asked the bailiff, I said, "Mr. Bailiff, do you hear that?" He just stood there. "Mr. Bailiff, you're standing mute. Did you hear me? Arrest that judge." You could have heard a pin drop. I've a- I have asked the bailiff to arrest the judge in court 8 times now. And every time the judge sits there and keeps his mouth shut because he knows one word out of him: witness tampering, obstruction of justice, both of them felonies. Mess with me, bad boy. We'll see how that works out for you. We can do
Wit-
this.
Witness tampering and what was the second thing that the judges are?
Obstruction of justice. 3605, 3606 Texas Penal Code. Read those codes. It'll read like a comic book. All the stuff you can do to them. It, it, and I
Okay,
don't. I
I'll tell you, for years I have thought that this was going to take a huge investment of time. My brain function wasn't up to it. I didn't think I'd be able to uh, get all these laws in my head. I thought, well, better to just take the strategy of getting them to prove that their laws exist, or that their laws apply. And so I've put a lot of mind power into that. But heck, you make it sound like it's a comic book to read, and I can do that.
yeah, it is. You'll say, "I can do this to him. I can do that to him. This is illegal. That's illegal." You won't believe all this stuff that's illegal. They ordered me to come to court to meet with the prosecutor. I charged them with 32.48, simulating a legal process. 2801 lists all of the things you can order me to come to court for. To meet with the prosecutor is not one of them. So, and in this case, the prosecutor sent the summons. The judge wasn't in the building. So they were pretending to have a hearing, but there was no judge there. So the prosecutor pretended to convene this hearing. Well, that's impersonating a public official. You might be a public official, but you're not that public official. And that's not an authority you have. That is simulating a legal process.
I had there was a judge in my foreclosure case, and he died, committed suicide apparently. Well, with a shotgun to the head. I don't know how that happened,
He
but
shot himself 3 times in the head with a shotgun.
maybe twice, maybe twice, and that's even improbable. But afterward, they issued a an order to evict out of the house, and it was signed by the deceased judge and notarized as having been signed.
They have a stack of
That's
motions
impersonating an
and pleadings.
officer, right?
Well, what they do is they have a stack of these standard motions and pleadings. The judge sits down and signs all of them, and then he directs the clerk to take one of these and file it. So it's not as bad as it appears. But when the judge dies, they really need to get that part fixed. I've actually ran into that before, where a judge died, and they're actually just recently, and they are so careless. Nobody takes them to task. I go in there and I deliberately set tasks for them that they're not going to want to do, so I can hammer them for it. And I don't want to get any of these officials in trouble. I just want to get their attention. I want to point the law out to them. So, sorry, I have a visitor.
Visitor?
Sure. Go ahead and talk. I'll take it for a few
Oh,
moments. I don't know if I can mute you. I'll mute you. You're muted, Randy. So you can take care of the business you need to there for a second. And all right, I'll bring you back on. It looks like I've got your attention.
No, I apologize for that. But it's relatively simple. It's relatively straightforward. And it's really hard for them to deal with me because I'm not bringing some oddball solutions. Here's the code. I took the process that they're using to a personal friend of mine. He was the Justice of the Peace. He had been a policeman for 20 years, Mark Autry, and it was my opinion that Mark Autry would do what he believed was right if it hair-lipped the Pope. And I walked him through the codes and showed him what they were supposed to do and compared it to what they were actually doing. And he said to me, Mr. Kelton, you're telling me that everything I did for 20 years as a police officer and then for another 12 years as a justice of the peace was wrong. That everything everybody I've worked with for 30 years was doing was wrong. And you're right. I said, don't ask me, Mark. I didn't write the code. Here it is. I just read it. He couldn't wrap his head around the fact that he had been doing things wrong all this time. Cognitive dissonance. We run into that all the time. They can't imagine that you can be right. Even when the cards start crumbling around them, they still just can't imagine that you could possibly be right. They could possibly be doing these things wrong. Now, Mark was doing things wrong, but he was a good guy. He wanted to be a good guy. He wanted to help people. That's why he was here. He was just improperly trained. And it took me 30 years or 40 years to get it figured out. And it came from the top. They just passed a statute that ordered the Court of Criminal Appeals and the Office of Court Administration to develop this curricula. So I accused them of conspiring to an ongoing criminal enterprise instead, and sued them each in their personal capacity for 500 million. The number you come in the door with, the only criteria is you have to be able to explain how you got that number. And I maintain that because the police were directed to arrest people, take them directly to jail instead of directly to the nearest magistrate, that it caused this condition where the police could arrest you for anything they wanted to. They did not need probable cause. They could arrest you and take you to jail, and no one would ever question them because everybody
That
takes the
broke up.
deal
You said they could arrest you.
for anything they want to because nobody ever looks over their shoulder. The prosecutor, he doesn't care if you're guilty or not. He's going to force you to take a deal. I stopped the chief of police in Austin with a microphone. We were doing a broadcast from the city council meeting and asked him why he needed more money so that his officers could take blood on the side of the highway. And he said, well, to increase our conviction rate. I asked him, do you know what your conviction rate is now? Oh, I don't know. I said, well, guess. He said, oh, 70 or 80. Now, how about a little higher? How about 90, 95, 96, 99.6? He said, no, that can't be. I have a statistician here, and he calls this guy over and asks him, what's the average conviction rate for all crimes across the board in Texas? And the guy just kind of twiddled his feet and looked down at his toes. And I said, some 80, 90, and he nodded, 95, 99.6, and he nodded, yeah, 99.6. It rounds up to 100. Texas is the worst police state the world has ever seen. China, communist China, incarcerates approximately 121 people per 100,000. Russia, 357. The United States, 657 as a whole. Texas, 840 and climbing fast. We are the worst police state the world has ever seen, and almost nobody knows. We're about to fix that. We're about to start putting the right ones in jail. And there's a lot more to this. Read the code. The point is, read the code. Once you've read the code twice, these guys won't have a chance. Never ask a public official to do anything you actually want them to do, because you never ask them to do anything that the law does not compel them to do. And when they don't do it, don't cut them any slack. Call 911. Get someone out to arrest them. Well, the guy that comes out, he's not going to arrest him. So you tell him, well, life is filled with little decisions. We all get to make some. Your turn. Are you going to do your job as prescribed by the code, or are you going to shield this guy from prosecution in violation of 3805 Penal Code? And that's a felony in the state of Texas. Your decision. Decide. And when he refuses, wait right there. Don't go anywhere. Somebody's going to want to talk to you, and you take out your cell phone, dial 911. In Texas, it is a felony to interfere with a 911 call. That's why that bailiff came over and grabbed this guy and got him away from me. In Texas, if someone commits simple assault and they are prominently displaying a deadly weapon, that is a second-degree felony. Unless, and only Texas has this, unless they are a public official acting under the color or pretense of an official capacity, in which case it is a felony of the first degree. When that policeman walked around that counter and set his hand on that pistol, that's first degree felony aggravated assault 2202 B2A Texas Penal Code. And I'm charging him with it. Now, he's never going to get indicted for that, but who cares? I don't want him indicted. These public officials, they're like my grandchildren. If my grandchildren, one of my grandchildren's out in the yard, and he runs out toward the road, I'm not going to wait till he runs in the road. If he gets close to it, I'm going to snatch him up and tan his hide. Well, that's what we need to do to our public officials. And we have the power to do that. Once you start this,
I think you're
once,
breaking up right there. That's what we have to do to our public officials. And then
you once you start this, once you start taking on your public officials, you become a protected class. You have the same protection that a judge has. If the officer or anyone says anything that you can in any way construe as a threat, that gets another 911 call. In Fort Worth Courthouse, I called 911 three times in quick succession before I got a captain out there and he got things straight. But it's not to ruin their careers. It's not to get them in trouble. To get their attention. Remind them we have a set of rules, and you're to follow those rules. Don't care if you like the rules or not. I don't care if they're convenient or not, but you follow them. If you don't, me, this ordinary, everyday citizen, I am your worst nightmare. Only I can go directly to the grand jury. And I have a methodology for doing that. You take a criminal complaint, like whenever you go to the feds, they're hard to get to. So what you do is you make up a criminal complaint and you put it in an envelope and you send it to the special agent in charge of the local FBI. That's the only guy whose name you can get. The FBI agents no longer tell you who they are. We got secret police now. The only name you can get is a special agent in charge. So you send it to a criminal complaint to him, and you put a cover letter on there and ask him to initial this cover letter and return it in the included stamped self-addressed envelope. Well, you're not going to get that letter back. But you also, when you send the document to him, you insure it for $500. It costs about $10 or $15. So when you don't get that cover letter back, then you call the local posting inspector and tell him, I want my $500. So they're not going to want to give you $500. So the special agent in charge of the local FBI is going to get a visit from two knuckle dragging postal inspectors who have no love for the FBI. And they're going to force him to swear on a stack of Bibles that he actually got this. So they don't have to give me $500. And then, since I didn't get it back, I have reason to believe and do believe that he did not give notice to the grand jury of this crime. So I prepare another criminal complaint against him and I send it to the U.S. attorney, or I send it to the grand jury at the address of the U.S. attorney. And I put a cover letter on that one. And this cover letter asks the foreman of the grand jury to initial this, do not sign it, as the prosecuting attorney has a rubber stamp with your name on it that he uses to rubber stamp super indictments. So don't sign it. It might just be rubber stamped. I need to make sure you actually got this. Well, what do you think the chances are the foreman will ever see that letter? Somewhere between little and none. So when I don't get that one back, then I send another letter to the grand jury with a complaint against the U.S. attorney for shielding the special agent in charge from prosecution. And when the U.S. attorney gets that one, that's when he's going to say, that guy set me up. I said, yeah, as a matter of fact, I did. How does it feel, Bubba? And when you don't get that cover letter back, then you send it to the U.S. Attorney General in D.C. Do you know what every U.S. attorney must do when a new president takes office? They have to file their resignation so that the president can get rid of any of them he wants to and replace them with his own people. Well, they generally don't do that, but the president has their resignation. They can pull the plug on him anytime they want to. And U.S. attorneys are terrified that will happen. And also, you file a couple of bar grievances against the U.S. attorney. Bar grievances. If you file a bar grievance against a lawyer in any state in the United States, the state bar will get that grievance and they will throw it in the trash. And they'll send you back a letter that says, we examined into your accusation, find it does not rise to the level of misconduct. And that's a good thing. The reason it's a good thing is their insurance carrier knows they'll throw it in the trash. So how does the insurance carrier measure its level of risk? By valid bar grievances? Heck, they trash all of them. By the numbers. There are 9 underwriters of legal malpractice in the country. They're all underwritten by Lloyd's of London. They all have the same criteria. 1 bar grievance your first year of practice, they cancel immediately. 2 bar grievances any 1 year of practice, they cancel. 3, they'll cancel your law firm's malpractice insurance. Valid, invalid, they don't care. TCOL complaints or professional conduct complaints against police. If a policeman gets 6 professional conduct complaints against him, the jurisdiction has a bond for their whole department. It's just a big insurance policy, a group insurance policy. And it is the agent's job to charge his client as much as possible and avoid any claim. So he's going to go to the sheriff or the chief of police and say, look, you got this guy here. He is an unacceptable risk. You keep him, we'll raise your bond rating for the whole department. What do you think is going to happen to Joe Jackboot next time his contract comes up for renewal? Bye, Bubba. Now that might not be right, but life is tough. Deal with it. Judges, judicial conduct complaints. It puts a mark on their chart that never goes away. Same thing with bar grievances. Once a lawyer gets a bar grievance, so you got this lawyer's got 3 bar grievances. You give him a client, he wins the case, but he doesn't win as much as the client thought he should. And he checks the guy out and he finds he's got 3 bar grievances against him. So what the heck is this? You give me this loser. Then he sues the law. It ruins their career. Professional conduct complaints are the most powerful things you can do. And you can do those with absolute impunity. If you bar grieve a lawyer, he is forbidden to mention it to you. If he does, you bar grieve him for that. So it's kind of like you go into court and you stand behind your table and the lawyer goes over and stands behind his table, and before court starts, you walk over and kick him right square in the seat of his professional pants. And he's got to stand there and act like you didn't do it. Tough lawyer. I don't suggest people ruin lawyers' careers unless they earn it. The problem is they always earn it. Lawyers have been taught not to represent their clients. They're taught by judges. They're terrified of judges. When lawyers go to law school, they don't tell them that you're going to spend the rest of your professional career kissing some arrogant judge's behind. But that's the reality. A lawyer is not going to do anything to represent you if it could possibly annoy the judge or the prosecutor. because he feels like they will retaliate against his next client if he does. And they're right. They will. So what's he supposed to do? Well, you bar grieve him. Okay, it's kind of going to court is like sitting down at a four-sided chessboard. It's all about relationships. A couple of you get relationships between you and you knock out one of the other players. And then the others gang up on another and knock him out. Okay, it's all about relationships. So you go into court, you sit down at your table, your lawyer's to your right, opposing counsel to your left, the judge across from you. You have a relationship with your lawyer. Your lawyer has a relationship with opposing counsel and with the judge. If you can't get inside those relationships, you're going to get screwed. So the first thing to do is bar grieve your own attorney. And when you do that, he's going to jump up and down, rail in righteous indignation, and run to the judge and petition the judge to withdraw. And you go in there and you tell him, don't you dare let him withdraw. He's my counsel of choice and he's under contract. And the judge will say, well, you bar grieved him. How do you know about that? He's not supposed to mention that to anybody. I'm going to have to bar grieve him for that.
Well, and if the judge allows that attorney to withdraw, he's interfering with a third party contract, and he's dropped his immunity for that. Roger,
Exactly.
who put comment on the screen, taught me that from you. Roger asks,
he's right.
The judge asked me if I filed a grievance against the public defender. So being a confidential matter, that attorney told the judge I had done that.
Yeah, he did. He should get a bar grievance for that. And the judge should get a judicial conduct complaint for listening to it. He should have told him not to tell him. But this is how you get inside their relationships. Then the lawyer runs to the judge. Oh, judge, you got to help me. You got to help me. I got this unruly client here, and I'll pay you back on the next one. This wins cases. It's not about the law, guys. I'm a creature of statute. But I understand at the end of the day, it's not about the law. It's about politics. Before you do anything, consider the politics. What's going to happen when you take this lowly clerk out here who's following the judge's procedures and you craft a criminal complaint against her and give it to the judge and ask him to issue a warrant for her arrest? I did that for the last ticket I got. Oh, she was not a happy camper. But I didn't press to get her arrested. I made a little noise and I jumped up and down and I railed in righteous indignation. But I didn't really want her arrested. I just wanted to get her attention. We need to start getting their attention. And we can like no one else can. We tend to want lawyers to do our work for us. They can't. Lawyers have been neutered. You just have control of all of them. So you go for the judge. Judge want to have himself an attitude? I'll help him out with his attitude. The judge has two duties. He must determine the facts in accordance with the rules of evidence, then apply the law as it comes to him to the facts in the case. As it comes to him is important. He can't go out and find the law himself. It must be in the pleadings. If it's not in there, it's not before the court. You can give the judge the most convincing reasons and compelling stories and as to why he should rule in your favor. But if you haven't given him facts and law, you've given him nothing he can work with. So I suggest anybody going into a court case, the first thing you want to do is go get a copy of uh, the what do you call it, the pattern jury charge. The pattern jury charge is the last thing the judge is going to say to the jury before they go to deliberate. This is what you must find. If you argue anything that's not in that pattern jury charge, you're wasting everybody's time. If you fail to argue and prove a single item that's in that pattern jury charge, the judge or the jury has no power to rule in your favor. Most pro se's lose this way. The judge is not going to tell you that's why you're losing. You're going to bring all of these arguments that don't go to facts and law, that go to opinion, and he's going to sit there politely and listen and nod his head as if he's paying attention, but he's not. He's sitting there waiting for you to give him facts and law as that applies to the facts. Without that, you don't have any standing. Does anybody have any questions for me?
I do. In one of my cases, they asked me for jury instructions. What the heck are jury instructions?
There you can research that on the web. You need to before, if you're doing your own case, you need to look for standard jury instructions. There are lawyers out there who will have the standard jury instructions they always give the jury. It's pretty straightforward. You want to ask the jury if they can rule without passion, can rule based on the facts and the law. How you ask that of them, it kind of depends on you. But there are plenty of resources out there where you can find jury instructions.
Nice.
I don't get that. I don't get that far often in my cases.
Oh, Eartha Star is here. She says, "Hi, Joe and Randy." Let's see. Do I have a guest? Add a guest. Copy link. If anybody needs to call in or something, there's the link. But yeah, there were some questions I had. I was like, when you were a child, were there any hints about what you would become in life?
No, I was an electrical engineer and a pilot. I wanted to fly airplanes. I got my brother got drafted into Vietnam, and to keep from getting drafted, I joined before I had time to go to college. So I didn't get to fly airplanes in the military except one time, and I ground looped that one. We got shot down, and the pilots got shards in their eyes, and they couldn't see. They knew I flew, so they called me up, gave me a few instructions, and had me put it down in a rice paddy. Man, we couldn't see that drainage ditch at the end. It was all covered with vines. Man, I set that puppy down. That C-130 flies like a boat. Ease that thing back, set it down. It bounced one time and set down. And you could have walked faster than this thing was going. And the nose started over. And when it was standing straight up and down, the pilot said, "Nice work, a-hole." Flipped over the top. Man, my one chance to be a hero, and I do a ground loop.
Well, you got him down. You got him down safely, and that was that's the big thing.
They were in the back holding on to loading straps. They didn't consider it quite so safe. I won't even repeat what they were saying. All my crew back there.
No. Roger writes, a defendant must object at every turn. If not, nothing can be used on appeal. The judge told me I was an objectionist, like there was something wrong with that. And the prosecution does it constantly, but that's okay.
That's standard procedure. You don't care what the judge says. It's your purpose to set the record for appeal. Never expect to win your case in the trial court. Your only purpose before the trial court is to set the record for appeal, and your objections are part of setting the record. When I get an objection, comment about my objections, I get pretty testy with them. This is my only purpose here, Your Honor. If I don't object to these, then I can't bring them up in appeal. So I'm going to object to everything. You can expect it. If you don't like it, then you just write down on your paper that I object to everything, so I don't have to waste everybody's time and annoy everybody. Otherwise, I'm going to object to everything, and I've had most of them will do that. Just a blanket objection to everything, then I'm covered.
Wow. Yeah, that's cool.
You,
To everything in every way.
you don't have to be afraid of that judge. Oh, my favorite story. We were helping people stop foreclosures, and we were in Texas. If it's an eviction hearing, you don't have to be a lawyer to represent someone. So, me and a friend of mine went in. We were representing some guys, and David went before me. And this Judge Hayes was a real stinker. I've known him for a long time. He's a real mean-spirited individual. So David goes up, and they start the hearing. And I walked up to the bar and just stood there. Finally, the judge looks up and said, "Can I help you?" I said, "Yes, Your Honor. My name's Randy Kelton, and I have a hearing deficiency." "Well, Mr. Kelton, just what's wrong with your hearing?" He said, "Oh, Judge, I was down in Mexico the other day, and I drank too much of that cheap tequila, and I lost my hearing aid." "Well, why are you telling me this?" I said, "Well, do you have accommodation for the hearing impaired?" "No, I do not." "Well, you have a sound system here. Will you turn it up?" "No, I will not." I leaned over the bar and said, "Well, then will you speak up?" And he did. He told the bailiff, if I didn't sit down and shut up, he's to throw me out of the courtroom. So I sat down and shut up. They call me up. He starts the hearing. "Objection. I am here at arm's length to the court. I have a challenge to subject matter jurisdiction before the court." "Yes, Mr. Kelton, you just filed that 20 minutes ago." "Yes, Your Honor. As a matter of fact, I did." "Well, I'm going to deny that." There's a lot of things you can do with a subject matter jurisdiction challenge. Deny it is not one of them. So I stood up, said, "We're done here," and I slammed my folder closed, started over toward the gate in the bar, and I pointed at the bailiff. "You, come with me." And I stormed out of the courtroom. The bailiff was a big guy, about 6'6", probably 400 pounds. He comes out and he says, a big bear of a man. "Well, what can I do for you, Mr. Kelton?" "I need you to arrest the judge." "Well, why would I arrest the judge?" "Class A misdemeanor official oppression, criminal violation 39.03 Penal Code. In that, he failed to perform a duty he was required to perform, and in the process denied me the full free access to or enjoyment of a right." "Well, Mr. Kelton, what right did he deny you then?" "He denied me in my right to accommodation under the Americans with Disabilities Act." And the bailiff said, "Well, Mr. Kelton, why didn't you tell the judge about the Americans with Disabilities Act?" "Well, hell, if I'd have done that, he might have turned the sound up." The bailiff stood there a minute. This grin come across his face. "Well, you set him up." I said, "Yeah, he was a sucker for that one, wasn't he? Now you get in there and arrest him." "Man, I can't arrest the judge." I said, "Look at you, big strapped-in officer, got that pistol on your hip. You need to take your chicken suit off." "I'm taking my chicken suit off." 2 days later, I was at a political rally, and this guy was running security, and he saw me in the pavilion. And he came over and he said, "Mr. Kelton, do you have a few minutes?" I said, "Sure." He says, he's taking me over to this room. He said, "These are all bailiffs from around the county. We do these gigs to make some extra money." I told him about it. I said, "Ooh, is George in there?" He said, "George Farley?" "Yeah, George Farley. Yeah, he's in there." Oops. So we go in there, and these bailiffs came over, shook my hand. What this guy told him, this is the guy that I told you about that set up Judge Hayes. They came over, shook my hand, and the vitriol that came out of their mouths about those judges was astounding. They hated those judges. They've got to stand there in court and watch that judge screw one person after another. They got to stand there and keep their mouth shut. It gave me a whole different perspective. Things are not like we tend to think they are. And given the opportunity, our public officials will be good guys. We just have to give them the opportunity. Now, sometimes we have to spank them a little bit to get them that opportunity. But we're all grown ups. Life is tough. Mostly, I'm trying to get people not to be angry at these officials. Anger screws up everything. You lose your perspective. Have fun with them. Set them up. Play them like cheap fiddles. They're suckers for it. And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. I could do this for 8 hours.
I love it. Thank you so much, especially that last part. Don't be angry about it. What play with them, you know.
Yeah,
Um,
play them like a cheap fiddle. When I went in and asked that justice of the peace to issue warrants, and he refused to issue the warrants, I did not laugh out loud, but I felt like it. I thought, what a putz. I didn't even have to gig you or anything. I figured I'd have him around a little bit. But he went for it immediately. So great. Once you've done this once or twice, your whole perspective will change. When you walk into a courthouse, you are the baddest motor scooter in the building. The reason you're the baddest motor scooter in the building is you're nobody. You're not a clerk, a bailiff, a prosecutor, a judge. They're all public servants. They're the servants. You're the master of those servants. And they forget that at their professional peril. Just read the codes. I don't even need to instruct you. You read the codes and you'll know. It's clear. You'll become a power. The American Revolution was won with 3% of the population. 3% is all it took. That's all we need. We
wow.
can take this system back, probably with less than 3%. I get one or two people in every county hammering those public officials. This stuff will start changing. The lawsuit I have before the court now is likely to change everything. So I'm hoping for it. It's been 40 years coming, but I'm ready to retire from law because it was my purpose when I started to put every judge in the country in a position such that when they step up behind the bench and look out across the bar at the gallery, I wanted them wondering which one of those scoundrels out there are waiting for me to render a ruling so he can run down to the grand jury and try to get me indicted. Thomas Thomas Jefferson said, "When the people fear the government, there is tyranny. When the government fears the people, there is liberty." And I'm trying to recruit some fearful people.
Wow. Your show is at ruleoflawradio.com, and
Yeah,
tell us a little bit about the show. And
we do a 2 hour show on Thursday nights at 8 p.m. Central and a 4 hour show on Fridays at 8, starting at 8 p.m. Central. And we take questions. I do
and
some
there
presentations until my listeners get bored, and I
and there
start
are
putting them to sleep.
archives as well.
Yeah, I've got about 3,000 archives, and I have a Telegram channel, the Law Society. A guy on there has put together a set of algorithms where you can put in a search term and it'll search all of my 3,000 archives for those terms. So you can tend to find whatever you're looking for.
I bet I know who did that.
You
Oh,
might. So if anybody's interested, my email is randy at ruleoflawradio.com. Just send me an email. I'll send you a link to the Telegram site. We've got almost 3,000 people on there, and they are good. They embarrass me. They're so good.
yeah. You inspire you and the others at Rule of Law Radio inspire a lot of people toward very high standard of. I mean, I know some, and
Well, I'll accept Eddie Craig.
yeah.
Somebody on my channel accused Eddie Craig of plagiarizing some of my stuff. Eddie Craig does a show on Monday night, and I never cut him any slack. And I was just incensed. You mean Eddie Craig plagiarized my stuff that I plagiarized from him? Yeah, we do that to each other. Yeah, Eddie is our traffic guy. If you have a traffic issue, Monday night's the time to talk to him. He is really good at it. But don't tell him I said anything nice about him. He won't know how to act.
I'm trying to get him on next week. And let's see. I want to say that the show is brought to you by Forgiveness Capital, advancing economic innovations in conflict resolutions through self-executing forgiveness judgments, acting as an irrefutable seed to distributed consensus markets to build the new economy upon, affirming the infinite worth of the individual at forgivenesscapital.com. That's been my work.
Well, you, I don't know what that means. Will you
I
explain a
know
little bit?
it's very complicated,
Oh, okay.
but essentially, if you like this cop in Bakersfield harmed me, and it seemed like there was no way I could get justice for it, and so what I'm going to do is I made a list of all the things that they did to me, and I put a price next to them. Like stomping on my head is like $1 billion with an intent to kill me, an expressed intent to kill me, and uh, and then it also compounded by, well, anyway. So let's just say it ended there. So it's $1 billion, and I issue some notices to tell them, hey, you did this to me. Do you deny it? And I give them a date, a deadline as to when. I'm going to talk with my hands, so I need more space on the screen. So they have a deadline about when they have an opportunity to object, because at that day, when that deadline hits, I forgive them, and that $1 billion becomes an asset that I'm paying myself for the damage to myself through the cryptocurrency. So I'm imbuing a token with $1 billion worth of forgiveness. And then I've got ways of teaching the markets how to engage, like a here, I've got a wristwatch here. I don't think the gears show though. So imagine gears in a watch. You know, you got a face on your watch. It goes 24 hours around, or 12 hours around with the hour hand. The second hand zips around every minute, the whole thing. But every second there's one. Thank you. Every second is like a little tick. And that $1 billion worth of value, we can use tiny pieces of it to represent those ticks. And I've got ideas about getting the marketplace, a marketplace of people, a small but growing one, to honor those ticks at face value, very small pieces of cryptocurrency. And then over time, we try to get those involved in larger transactions, uh, so that maybe we have a transaction of $1,000, and maybe we can get $100 worth of it, or $10 worth of 1,000, about a 1% piece slice, paid with forgiveness based cryptocurrencies. And over time, we press for that percentage to go up. But all along, everybody's affirming the face value of the $1 billion instrument by engaging with tiny ticks or tiny percentages of transactions. This way, we can expand the world to have infinite remedy for everything we mess each other up with. Because that's ultimately what I think is, somehow we've got to affirm that everybody has infinite value and is entitled to their remedy. And particularly if they're willing to forgive it, if they're willing to give it up in with the hook that maybe we'll get it back by learning to link arm in arm with a new kind of cryptocurrency that can slowly build traction. I was with Bitcoin in 2009. I was telling people to buy it, and back then you could get 4 of them for a penny. And I watched how this thing, skyrocketed in value over the years, up to $60,000 at its peak. Those cops, when they stomped on my head, caused me to forget about Bitcoin. The biggest financial opportunity of investment in the world, they stole from me by stomping on my head. And so I figure the $1 billion they owe me for stomping on my head is multiplied by the growth of Bitcoin from that date to its highest price. There's more than $1 billion worth of this stuff in the initial stage, and it gets multiplied out to like $1.8 quintillion. That's 18 zeros after a 1. That's a quintillion. Enough to fund everybody having like $27 million worth. So I know it sounds preposterous, but who was it? Buckminster Fuller said, something to the thing like, if you want to change a system, build something that's bigger, and better, and outmode the old system. So that's kind of what I'm trying to do. I've been really inspired by the fights against foreclosures. G. Edward Griffin's book, The Creature from Jekyll Island. These things made me understand that the banking system is working in an illusion-based system. And then over the years, I've come to understand that there's contracts between people, and well, the contracts have value. They have a face value in a sense. They have a mechanism for doing things. So maybe there is something to some of the debt-based monetary things, but they're not being upfront about it. They're not explaining what they're doing with it, how they're making money off of our signatures in the background. I just touched on it a little bit, Randy. I don't mean to explore your mind. What?
I said it is complex, and it's way above my head.
Boy,
I think your sheet's alive.
The cat's under it.
Okay, I do have to go. I have another show to do.
Thank you so much for coming and on the show. I've enjoyed it tremendously, and I know my listeners have too.
Good. If anybody has any questions, just email me, randy@ruleoflawradio.com, and I'll do my best to answer them. There
it is on the screen. I think there's just one other thing. Let's see. Somebody said, and this is kind of hard to read. I worry that you're setting up people to fail, giving them the sense of confidence that they can beat the courts But how many people are really going to have the ability to fully understand, retain, and utilize this information and not buckle under pressure? You could get into a whole heap of trouble. You're serious about this. I hope you start up a course to fully educate people on this as much as you can.
Come to
Among
my show. Come to
yes,
my show. This is what we do. So far as I know, nobody's ever went to jail doing what I tell them to do. When people start bringing me this patriot mythology stuff, I get real excited because I've been called around the country to get people out of jail from following those prescriptions. Nobody goes to jail doing what I tell them to do. And I don't ask people to take on more than they can. You ask how many people? 3%. If we get 3%, we'll change everything. You're right. Not everybody can do this. It's just not in a lot of people's character. And, I'm an old guy. My house is paid for. My car is paid for. My son has 2 PhDs. My daughter's an accountant, makes more money than I ever made in my life. Nobody depends on me. So I can afford to do this stuff. If you got a wife and kids, you don't have this option. And I don't suggest that people who have others that are depending on them do this. Save that for us. We can do that. We got enough of us out here who can do this. There's a bunch of old guys like me, and us old guys, we're always cranky. Heck, we got to get up every 3 hours and pee, so we never get good sleep. We're always grouchy. We're just perfect. And we're old. We don't care anymore, so we can do this. Don't go out and do this stuff unless you're really dedicated. It's enough to
I,
support those who do.
we'll get off this show really quick. You've inspired me. I want to do that whole public attorney general thing, and maybe get out there and stop them from adding vitamin A and vitamin D to the milk. But Star writes, "Oh, I'm the biggest supporter of the forgiveness capital remedy coin and anti-money transition mindset. What is truly valuable?" Man, adjust them. Well, I'll let you go. Thank you, Randy.
You, thank you for having me.
All right. Goodbye, everybody. And we are